Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 425. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. Not a whole lot of news to talk about on today's show. I think it's been a while since I opened a show that way, but the lineup of articles is a little bit shorter. Not sure if that means it's going to be a shorter show, though. Sometimes we end up talking a little bit more, even if there isn't as much, main different news stories to talk about. Anyways, just want to remind people that they can share the show. Is hosted at the Libertarian Institute. You can find the show on the blog at antiwar.com. YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee is where we post the video version of the show. And of course, it's up anywhere you can listen to podcasts. And with that, let's get into today's show. All right, the first article I have today is by the show's co-host Connor Freeman. Department of Defense insiders accuse U.S. arms dealers of price gouging amid Ukraine proxy war. The American military-industrial complex firms are guilty of price gouging, former Pentagon insiders told Newsweek. These accusations come amidst Washington's exponentially rising demand for weapons to both bolster Taiwan in an effort to destabilize China and support NATO's proxy war for Kiev during its war with Russia. The Ukraine policy of providing massive quantities of arms, no matter the expense, in particular, is weakening America's national security and combat readiness by depleting stocks which cannot be easily replenished due to weapons firms' skyrocketing prices, according to the former official. For 4 decades, Shay Assad worked as a contract negotiator at the Department of Defense. He recently sounded off about these astronomical price increases and the resultant determinant effect on the military during a recent report on 60 Minutes, the CBS News program. The gouging that takes place is unconscionable, Assad said. There is no doubt about it. He continued, you can only buy so much because you can only have so much money, and that's why I say is really any different from not giving a Marine enough bullets to put in his clip. It's the same thing. Assad previously worked for Raytheon as well, the arms industry giant on whose board Lloyd Austin sat before becoming Pentagon chief. According to Assad, the Department of Defense overpays for radar and missiles, helicopters, planes, submarines, down to the nuts and bolts. The report highlighted the fact that a shoulder-fired Stinger missile produced by Raytheon, which cost $25,000 in 1991, is now priced at more than $400,000. Newsweek described the price rise as an eye-watering increase, even when taking into account inflation as well as in-term technological advancements. He went on to explain that the Pentagon's accountability system, such as it is completely broken. Assad said no matter who they are, no matter what company it is, they need to be held accountable. And right now, that accountability system is broken in the Department of Defense. Moreover, Assad cited 2 more instances of gouging on the part of the arms industry by behemoths Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Raytheon. Lockheed Martin and Boeing were found to have yielded an over 40% profit on sales of PAC-3 surface-to-air missiles to Washington and its allies. Assad explained that the companies saw a windfall of hundreds of millions on the deals over 7 years, and based on what they actually made, we would have received an entire year's worth of missiles for free. Lockheed protested to 60 Minutes that the deals had been negotiated in good faith. So not that it's not true, just, they say, it's all above board. By overstating the cost and time needed to produce the radar equipment, Raytheon was also alleged to have taken obscene profits from the Patriot air defense system. The reporters were told by a company spokesperson that Raytheon was working to equitably resolve the dispute. It is noted that in 2021, CEO Greg Hayes notified investors that Raytheon schemed to put aside nearly $300 million for profitable liability. Assad demonstrated to the 60 Minutes host that an oil pressure, oil pressure switch, which was selling for over $10,000 when he claimed the switch should cost $328. So imagine that the DoD is paying over $10,000 and he's saying it should cost just over $300. The host asked Assad a question regarding the huge discrepancy, to which the former official said gouging. What else can account for it? Assad went on to say the widespread practices show arms firms are hoodwinking and taking advantage of the American taxpayer. We have to have a financially healthy defense industry base. We all want that, but we don't want to do is take advantage of and get hoodwinked. We have nowhere else to go. For many of these weapons that are being sent over to Ukraine right now, there is one supplier and the companies know it. Retired Air Force Lieutenant Chris Bowden, who oversaw the weapons purchases during his time in the military, further explained his concerns over the fact that when companies sell their weapons to the Department of Defense, they retain proprietary information required to fix the systems themselves, precluding the Pentagon in some cases from doing its own repairs. It's not really a true capitalistic market because one company is telling you what's going to happen. It's a monopoly, reiterated DoD auditor Mark Owens, and he said that to retired DoD auditor Mark Owens told that to CBS News. These reports come as tensions between Washington and Russia, as well as China, are growing at a rapid clip. The U.S. is planning on fighting a hot war with China. Concurrently, the White House is committing billions of dollars in unprecedented military aid to Taipei, some of which is being drawn from the dwindling DoD stockpiles used to prop up Kiev's war against Moscow via the Presidential Drawdown Authority. Since 2018, the Pentagon has been shifting its focus away from counterterrorism in the Middle East and North Africa to focus primarily on so-called great power competition with Russia and China, paid respectively as a number 1 and number 2 targets. This has reaffirmed in subsequent national defense strategies, as the shift in 2018 was codifying renewed Cold War against Russia and China, launched by the U.S. and, in the case of Moscow, decades prior to the officially adopted national defense strategy. It is also critical to note that as the new Cold War became hotter, the nominally military budget is nearing a whopping $900 billion and will soon surpass the previously unthinkable $1 trillion mark. However, a closer look reveals that the real national security budget is already fast approaching $1.5 trillion. This larger figure includes not only the mammoth War Department budget, but also a plethora of other expenses. The Defense Department of Veteran Affairs interest on the warfighting share of the national debt, nuclear weapons, and the Department of Homeland Security. Congress recently simulated an attack on Taiwan by the Chinese mainland and come to the conclusion that Washington should thus ensure Taipei is armed to the teeth. Center for a New American Security, CNAS, the ultra-hawkish Beltway think tank, which has members and associates planted throughout the Joe Biden administration, carried out the exercise with the House Select Committee on China. CNAS is funded by Taiwan via the island's de facto embassy in the United States, as well as the Pentagon, the State Department, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and Boeing. In August 2021, investigative journalist Dan Cohen reported CNAS has taken more money from weapons companies over the past several years than any other think tank in Washington. At least 16 CNAS alumni are now in key positions in the Biden Pentagon and State Department. So, you know, this is critical. And as the article really stresses, part of the reason this is able to happen is because there's so much demand for more weapons because of the war in Ukraine and because of the military buildup against China in the Asia Pacific, including with Taiwan. All right, next up is an article that I wrote for the Libertarian Institute. West wants relationship with Ukraine to follow the Israel model. The United States and some of its NATO allies plan to increase weapons sharing and provide additional security guarantees to Ukraine. Polish President Duda told the Wall Street Journal that Western leaders were supportive of developing ties with Kiev similar to the relationship Washington keeps with Tel Aviv. Duda told the Wall Street Journal that President Joe Biden discussed the idea of bolstering the ties with Ukraine to resemble those with Israel when he visited Poland earlier this year. The Polish president claimed the Israel model was gaining momentum and would potentially be an agenda item for the upcoming NATO summit in July. An unnamed White House official confirmed to the Wall Street Journal that an Israel model emerged as a way to address the core of Ukraine's security issues, recognizing that it wouldn't achieve NATO membership anytime soon. However, the official continued, any agreement would be based loosely on Israel's security model, and the contours of Ukraine's defense agreement remain fluid. Both Duda and the American official noted discussions were still ongoing. And so with what that American official was saying, I think he was saying it's not going to be exactly like Israel, which obviously these are different countries in quite different situations. And so that would make sense. But, you know, that those details are still being worked out. Some members of NATO have previously grown frustrated with each other over what pledges would be made to Kiev during the upcoming NATO summit in Lithuania. Poland and the Baltic states have been lobbying the bloc to provide Ukraine with a concrete path to membership in the alliance. Washington and some Western European nations are only willing to provide Kiev with vague promises of future membership. The Polish leader presented the Israel model as a compromise position. Russia needs to understand today that Ukraine has got those security guarantees and that they're not going to lapse with time or with fatigue of the West, said Duda. He added, it's quite understandable that Ukraine cannot become a member of NATO when the war is in Ukrainian territory. Further upgrading Kiev's military risks provoking a severe Russian response. After Western leaders announced they would begin a program that would see F-16s transferred to Ukraine, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister said, we see that Western countries are still adhering to the escalation scenario. It involves colossal risk for themselves. How the Kremlin will respond to NATO's increasingly close ties with Kiev is unclear. The White House may view following the Israel model as avoiding the Russian red line of admitting Ukraine as a full member within the alliance. However, America's elected leaders proclaim Tel Aviv to be Washington's most vital ally, and Biden has described the relationship with Israel as bone deep. Additionally, human rights groups have labeled Israel an apartheid state. Tel Aviv collects billions in military aid from Washington each year, then uses its armed forces to oppress the Palestinians. Kiev has its own substantial issues with human rights. Ukraine has adopted a series of language laws meant to suppress the large percentage of Ukrainians who are Russian speakers. Since the Russian invasion last year, Ukrainian President Zelensky has nationalized the media, outlawed his political opposition, and waged a campaign to cleanse Ukraine of all historical vestiges of the Russian culture. And so I think that last part is one of the reasons this is most alarming. I think when you funnel a lot of billions of dollars every year into a country in military aid, it's going to make that country more militaristic. And so that's not necessarily the U.S. is to blame for Israeli apartheid, but without the U.S. sponsorship, it seems like the current situation may not have gone on so long, or Israel would be more ostracized in the international community if it wasn't for Washington continuing to lobby on behalf of Tel Aviv to, be more, accepted. And you can't, we pass anti-boycott, divestment, and sanction laws in this country, preventing people from boycotting Israel, as a form of expression and protest, violating our First Amendment. So I do worry that kind of mentality, adopting that towards Ukraine, could almost be worse in the long run, because Israel is almost a more important ally than NATO to a lot of Americans. And creating that atmosphere around Ukraine could become very problematic in the long run. So I think this is very concerning, and I will keep my eye on it. And of course, we've been talking about on this show the upcoming summit in Lithuania in July for weeks now. And it does seem that this is a slightly less provocative step than the ones the Eastern Europeans want to take, but it is certainly a significant step towards, more support for Kiev. All right, next up here, Ukraine-backed saboteurs launch cross-border raid in Russian Belgorod region. Russian officials said Monday that the Ukrainian sabotage group launched a cross-border raid in a area of Russia that's right on the border with Ukraine. So it's not like, they crossed into another region or something like that. The governor of the region said that 8 people were injured. According to Ukrainian officials and media outlets, the attack was carried out by Russian citizens who had volunteered to fight for Kiev. Groups known as the Freedom of Russia Legion and Russian Volunteer Corps. Both groups claimed on Telegram that they liberated a settlement inside of Russia. According to the Russian TASS news agency, the Russian military and security forces are taking measures to eliminate the enemy and are driving it away from Russian territory. The Kremlin said the attack was launched to distract from Ukraine's losses in Bakhmut. And this is something that's interesting and something that I've talked about on the show recently, that I have suspected that Ukraine, because they may not be able to mount a counteroffensive at this time, have done things in recent months like carry out a lot of drone strikes against Crimea, sabotage rail lines in Russia, carry out shellings of villages in Russia near the border with Ukraine. This particular attack, we had the 2 drones coming near the Kremlin. So all these different actions may be Ukraine trying to, in some way, show it could reach out to Russia in various places when they can't actually mount a large counteroffensive to retake Ukrainian territory. So I do wonder if that's really what's going on here. So Dave goes on in his article here. According to the Times of London, documents that surfaced on Discord, allegedly leaked by airman Jat Teixeira, show that Ukraine has been planning to support Russia's volunteer attacks on Russian territory and that groups are armed with NATO equipment. So that is really terrifying. This is from the Times, or a document that the Times is reporting on. So I guess this will be one of the leaked Discord documents. Ukraine provides comprehensive support to Russian volunteers ready to liberate Russian territories from President Putin's territory by armed means. Such detachments are equipped with various qualitative types of NATO weapons. The personnel has passed respective training for usage of such weapons and has successful combat experience from various parts of the front line in Ukraine. So again, this is really concerning. The Washington Post reported earlier this month that the Discord leaks show President Zelensky proposed cross-border attacks inside of Russia to siege villages during conversations in January, but didn't say he planned on using Russian volunteers. And so again, look, if you can't launch an attack to retake your own territory, it may not be, just from a risk standpoint, right? Like you're playing the board game. Okay, well, I can't retake this territory, but I could take some Russian territory and trade it back later. The only problem is, of course, is what kind of escalations does it mean, particularly if these attacks are carried out by troops using NATO weapons with potentially NATO training. All right, so this is kind of what I suspect here. NATO Air Force Secretary says F-16s won't become a game changer for Ukraine. I think I probably agree with Kendall here, but let's get into the write-up by Dave DeCamp. Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall said Monday that the provisions of F-16 fighter jets to Kiev will give Ukraine's military an incremental boost, but said it would not be a game changer in the conflict. The F-16s is a reasonable option for them as for a whole bunch of reasons. Kendall said it would give Ukrainians an increment of capabilities that they didn't have right now, but it's not going to be a drastic game changer as far as I'm concerned. for their military capabilities. The U.S. announced on Friday it would sign off on European deliveries of F-16s for Ukraine, but there is still a long way to go before the planes reach Kiev. No countries have officially committed to sending their F-16s, and the current focus is on supporting training for Ukrainian pilots. Estimates vary significantly on how long it might take to train Ukrainian pilots. Colin Powell, the Undersecretary for Defense Policy, previously said the training could take up to 2 years, but Kendall said he expects the Ukrainians to only need a few months. And so, again, there's a little bit more to it, I think, than just if they're trained in a few months, what are they trained to do? What kind of operations can they carry out? And then of course, can Ukraine make the necessary logistical changes and infrastructure changes to support and be able to carry out operations with F-16s? And then how long is it going to take to, the ground and maintenance crews to make sure these planes can continue to fly missions, one after another. So these are all important questions. And then, of course, too, who's going to repair these planes when they get damaged? Because my guess is it's not going to be the Ukrainians. They'll be moving them in and out of the country, assuming that they're, not completely destroyed. So here we go. China questions U.S. sincerity about improving communications. And again, I think this one is, as I suspected, it's not, as Biden said, that things are going to thaw quickly, and Beijing still has some issues. So on Monday, China's foreign ministry questioned the U.S.'s sincerity and calls that for more communications and engagement between Beijing after President Biden said he expected a thaw between the two nations. And I think he said that was going to come soon. China and the U.S. maintain necessary communications. However, the U.S. says it wants to speak to the Chinese side while seeking to suppress China through all possible means and impose sanctions on Chinese officials, institutions, and companies. Is there any sincerity and significance of the communications like this? The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning said. President Biden had made his comments on Sunday during the final day of the G7 summit in Hiroshima, Japan. He was asked if the U.S. was considering lifting sanctions on China's new defense minister to pave a way for more communications between the U.S. and China, and he said the issue was under negotiation. Chinese defense minister was appointed to his post in March. The minister was targeted with U.S. sanctions while he was the head of China's Equipment Development Department over its purchase of Russian Su-35 fighter jet aircraft and S-400 air defense systems from Russia. The Chinese Foreign Ministry said on Monday and called for the U.S. to immediately lift sanctions and take concrete actions to remove obstacles, create a favorable atmosphere and conditions for dialogue and communications. And look, I really hope that China doesn't expect that, because that's not going to happen. I guess today I did see a report in Voice of America saying there's an American official looking to downplay the balloon incident. So there is that, but overall, I just don't see the Americans willing to communicate to the Chinese in a way that they find acceptable. And I'm not sure what that means in the long run here. All right, last article today. 1 second. Actually, never mind. That was the last article I had today. So as I expected, a little bit of a shorter show. One more show this week. We will be back on Thursday. Thank you all so much for tuning in.